At 2:44 a.m., deep inside the forests of the Tver region, a Russian lieutenant named Sergei sat inside the command cabin of a Pantsir S-1 air defense system. He was guarding the 107th Arsenal of the GRAU, a massive ammunition depot holding 30,000 tons of high explosive ordnance. Sergei was tired, his eyes burning from staring at the green glow of the radar scope for 6 hours straight. The screen was clear. The airspace was supposed to be empty. But then, the sound began. It wasn't the roar of a jet engine. It wasn't the supersonic scream of a cruise missile. It was a low, rhythmic buzzing, like a motor engine struggling up a steep hill. On his radar scope, a single blip appeared, then 2, then 10, then 20. Sergei's system, a masterpiece of modern engineering, worth $15 million, automatically locked onto the targets. The fire control computer identified them as aerial threats, but the data didn't make sense. The targets were flying at a laughable 120 kilometers per hour. They were small, erratic, and made of foam, plywood, and plastic. Sergei had to make a decision in less than 4 seconds. He had 12 missiles in his launch tubes. Each missile cost roughly $100,000. The targets approaching him cost less than the tires on his command truck. If he fired, he would burn $1.2 million of taxpayer ammunition in seconds to destroy what were essentially toys. If he didn't fire, those toys would impact the arsenal, triggering a detonation equal to a tactical nuclear weapon. He pressed the button. The night sky erupted in flame as the hypersonic interceptors left the rails. But what Sergei didn't know was that this was exactly what the attackers wanted. He wasn't fighting a weapon system. He was fighting a calculator, and the math was about to kill him. Welcome to the new era of warfare. This is the cost-exchange ratio trap. To understand why the world's second largest military is bleeding money, you have to look inside the weapon that is terrorizing them. The drones striking deep into Russia are not military marvels. They are Frankenstein monsters of the global supply chain. The engine powering these long-range strike weapons is often a Chinese-made DLE-170 petrol engine. You can buy it on AliExpress right now for $500. It is designed for hobbyist model airplanes. The guidance chip is a commercial U-Blox GPS module, available for $40. The body is fiberglass and epoxy resin, cured in a garage. The total estimated cost for the airframe is roughly $15,000. Now, look at what is trying to stop it. Russia relies on the S-400 Triumf system. It is the pride of their aerospace forces, a system that NATO fears. A single battery costs $600 million. The primary interceptor, the 48N6DM missile, flies at Mach 6 and carries a 180-kilogram fragmentation warhead. It uses an active radar seeker that contains gold-plated circuitry and sapphire lenses. The cost of just one of these missiles is approximately $5 million on the export market. Do the math. When a Russian commander fires an S-400 at a cheap drone, he is trading a $5 million asset for a $15,000 threat. That is a cost ratio of 333 to 1. Even if the Russian missile hits 100% of the time, which it doesn't, Russia loses. They are spending their defense budget faster than they can print rubles, while their enemy buys engines from hobby shops. But the economic trap is deeper than just money. It's about production capacity. Russia can manufacture perhaps 200 of these complex interceptor missiles a year. Ukraine's distributed network of workshops can 3D print and assemble 200 drones a week. At 3 a.m. The first wave of drones crossed the outer perimeter of the Tver arsenal, and they brought something new, something that would render the Russian radars useless. Russian air defense doctrine was built to fight the West. They spent 50 years designing radars to track supersonic fighter jets and cruise missiles, metal objects, moving very fast. This obsession with speed became their Achilles heel. Modern radars, like the 92N6E gravestone used by the S-400, rely on the Doppler effect to filter out noise. When a radar beam hits a moving object, the frequency of the reflection changes. The computer looks for high-speed shifts to identify a jet fighter. It deliberately ignores slow-moving reflections to avoid tracking birds, rain clouds, or trucks on a highway. The operators of the drone swarm knew this. As they approached the radar horizon, the attack wave programmed their engines to throttle down. The drones slowed to 90 kilometers per hour. They dropped their altitude to 30 meters, skimming just above the pine trees. To the Russian supercomputers, these drones didn't look like weapons. They looked like wind-blown leaves or a flock of migrating geese. The moving target indicator filtered them out. Inside the command trucks, the radar scopes remained clear. The automated systems stayed silent. The operators were blind, staring at empty screens, while 300 kilograms of explosives floated toward them at the speed of a delivery scooter. By the time the visual observers on the roof heard the engines, it was too late for the long-range missiles. The defense collapsed inward. The Russians had to switch to their last line of defense, the Pantsir S-1 and simple anti-aircraft guns. And this is where the cardboard fleet came into play. Among the wave of suicide drones were ghosts. The SYPAQ Corvo, a drone literally made of waxed cardboard and rubber bands. It arrives in a flat-pack box, like furniture from IKEA. It costs roughly $3,000 per unit, but on a radar screen, a cardboard box wrapped in aluminum foil looks exactly like a suicide drone, packed with explosives. At 3:15, the Pantsir batteries protecting the ammo depot opened fire. The Pantsir is a formidable weapon, equipped with twin 30mm cannons and short-range missiles. The cannons roared, spewing tungsten shells at a rate of 2,500 rounds per minute. The night sky turned into a web of tracers. The Russian gunners were excellent. They shredded the incoming targets. One after another, the drones disintegrated in mid-air, showering the forest with confetti. The Russian crews cheered. They were winning. They had intercepted 90% of the incoming wave. But they had made a fatal calculation error. They had just expended 4,000 rounds of 30mm ammunition and 18 interceptor missiles to shoot down empty cardboard boxes. The magazines were empty. The barrels were glowing red hot, too warped to fire accurately. The reload crews were scrambling, dragging heavy crates of ammo through the mud. It takes 20 minutes to fully reload a Pantsir system. At 3:35, exactly as the reload crews were struggling with the heavy belts, the real strike package arrived. These weren't cardboard. These were the heavy lift beavers, carrying thermobaric warheads. They flew into a silent sky. No missiles rose to meet them. The Russians had won the battle against the decoys, but they had disarmed themselves for the war. Desperate to stop the second wave, Russian command scrambled a MiG-31 Foxhound from a nearby airbase. This aircraft is a monster, capable of Mach 2.8. It carries the R-37M air-to-air missile with a range of 400 kilometers. It is designed to kill American bombers from the edge of space. But tonight, it was asked to kill a lawnmower flying at treetop level. The pilot roared into the zone at 800 kilometers per hour. His Zoslin M radar, the most powerful phased array ever fitted to a fighter, scanned the ground. Nothing. The problem was ground clutter. When a radar looks down, the Earth reflects energy back. To find a target, the radar needs to see a contrast. But the drones were made of plastic and wood. They had almost no radar cross-section. And because they were cold, their small engines barely hotter than the surrounding air. The Meiji's heat-seeking missiles couldn't lock on. The pilot was furious. He tried to engage visually. He dropped his speed, struggling to keep the massive jet in the air at 300 kilometers per hour. He lowered his nose, searching the darkness for a shadow. And then, the economic math struck again. A MiG-31 burns roughly $40,000 worth of fuel per hour. The maintenance cost per flight hour is nearly $50,000. Every minute that jet circled, it cost Russia more than the drone it was hunting. To make matters worse, flying a supersonic interceptor at low altitude at night is suicide. The pilot was fighting gravity, stall warnings, and tree lines. He fired a $1 million R-73 heat-seeking missile at a suspected shadow. The missile seeker, confused by the lack of a hot jet exhaust, drifted off and impacted a greenhouse in a nearby village. The pilot radioed negative contact and turned back to base. The airspace belonged to the drones. The swarm was now 10 kilometers from the depot, but they were entering the zone of denial. Russia had activated the Pol-21 electronic warfare system. This system blasts the GPS spectrum with noise. Any normal GPS receiver in this zone wouldn't just lose signal, it would be spoofed. It would think it was in Poland or the middle of the ocean. Usually, this causes drones to crash or fly in circles until they run out of fuel. But the engineers who built these toys had anticipated this. They went back to technology from the 1950s. As the GPS signal dissolved into static, the drones didn't panic. They switched modes. First, dead reckoning. A simple compass and a sensor counting the revolutions of the propeller. The computer calculated distance based on speed and time. Fly north for 10 minutes. Then, System 2 engaged. Terrain reference navigation. A downward-facing camera snapped a photo of the ground every 2 seconds. The drone's Raspberry Pi computer, a $35 processor, used by students to learn coding, compared these photos to a preloaded satellite map stored on an SD card. It saw a river bend. It matched it to the map. It saw a distinctive crossroads. It corrected its course. It saw the high-voltage power lines feeding the depot. The drones didn't need satellites. They were reading the landscape. The massive electronic jamming towers, pumping out kilowatts of energy, were jamming nothing. The drones were effectively deaf, but they could see perfectly. At 3:52, the lead drone cleared the final tree line. Ahead of it lay the 107th Arsenal, rows of concrete bunkers, open-air storage sites piled high with Grad rockets, and 152mm artillery shells. The target was so large it was impossible to miss. The drone didn't dive immediately. It circled once, its camera transmitting the final telemetry. Then, it cut its engine. The silence was more terrifying than the noise. Without the engine heat, the remaining heat-seeking manpads on the ground couldn't track it. It fell silently out of the sky, guided only by gravity and aerodynamics. The impact point was Bunker 4, a storage facility for Iskander ballistic missile warheads. The drone punched through the thin corrugated metal roof. the 40-kilogram shaped charge detonated. This first explosion was small, barely a pop in the distance, but it cracked the casing of the missile stored inside. The solid rocket fuel ignited. Pressure built up inside the concrete bunker for milliseconds, until the structure could no longer contain it. The resulting explosion measured 2.8 on the Richter scale. Earthquake sensors in Norway, hundreds of kilometers away, registered the shockwave. But the horror for the Russians was just beginning. The blast threw burning debris thousands of meters into the air. This debris landed on the open-air storage stacks of artillery shells. The chain reaction was instantaneous. The sky turned white. A mushroom cloud rose 6 kilometers into the atmosphere. The heat was so intense, it was visible on weather satellites. Windows were shattered in the town of Toropets, 15 kilometers away. Back in the Pantsir command vehicle, Lieutenant Sergei never had a chance to reload. The shockwave flipped his 30-ton vehicle like a toy car. The radar dish, which had failed to see the slow-moving death, was torn from its mount. The economic equation had resolved itself. $1.2 million in interceptor missiles, $15 million in radar systems, and hundreds of millions of dollars in ammunition, all erased by a swarm of drones that cost less than a luxury car. This strike proved that the old rules of war are dead. For decades, military doctrine was based on quality over quantity. Build the best jet, the smartest missile, the most expensive tank. But that doctrine assumed your enemy would play by the same rules. It assumed they would fight expensive with expensive. Instead, the battlefield has been democratized by cheap electronics. When a $500 engine can deliver a strategic blow to a nuclear power, the concept of air superiority becomes meaningless. Russia has the air superiority fighters, but they cannot stop the swarm. They can shoot down 10, maybe 50, maybe 100. But if the enemy launches 500, the defense runs out of missiles before the attacker runs out of drones. It is a war of industrial capacity. The smoke over the Tver region didn't clear for days. The fires burned through the weekend. And while the Russian generals tried to explain how their impenetrable air defense had failed, a 3D printer in a basement somewhere in Ukraine was already humming, printing the tail fin for the next wave. The components were already in the mail. The engines were shipping from China. The math remains the same. And until Russia finds a way to change the equation, the result will always be fire. But the drone war is evolving faster than we can record it. While Russia struggles to solve the $500 problem, a new threat is emerging on the horizon. Artificial intelligence swarms that don't need GPS or pilots at all. We are already analyzing the classified footage of these new autonomous systems. You don't want to miss that breakdown. If you learned something new about the economics of destruction today, leave a like. It helps the algorithm find the truth. And if you're new here, subscribe and turn on notifications, because the fog of war is thick, and we are here to clear it. I'll see you in the next brief. Dismissed.